He had always loved the quiet mornings on his property. The sun would rise over the hills, painting everything in soft orange and gold, and the world felt peaceful, calm, and safe. He would stand at the edge of his land, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the trees sway in the breeze and listening to the birds sing. This land had been more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of all the hard work, discipline, and commitment he had carried with him throughout his life. Every fence post, every patch of grass, every small detail had a story. He had built it all from scratch, with his own hands, after years of service and sacrifice. It was more than a home, it was a sanctuary. On one particular morning, as the mist lifted from the fields and the first rays of sunlight touched the soil, he noticed something unusual. There were small signs that someone had been on his property. At first it seemed minor, a few broken twigs, footprints near the edge of the land. He frowned, thinking perhaps an animal had wandered through. But as he walked further, he saw that the ground around his vegetable garden was disturbed. Soil had been moved, plants trampled, and the edges of the garden were not as neat as he had left them the night before. His heart sank. This wasn't an accident. Someone had been here. He inspected the fences next. The wooden posts were sturdy, the wire tight and secure. Yet there were marks, as if someone had tried to lift the wire to step over it. Nothing was stolen yet. Nothing was missing. But the message was clear. Someone had crossed the line. He felt a mix of anger and disbelief. He had lived in this area for years, respected his neighbors, and never had a real problem. Yet here it was, staring him in the face. He decided to handle it calmly. First, he walked to the neighboring properties, hoping to speak with someone who might have seen or heard something. He explained the situation politely, asking if anyone had noticed unusual activity. Most shook their heads, and some looked away, avoiding eye contact. One neighbor mentioned seeing a few teenagers wandering around late at night, but they didn't seem dangerous. Still, he couldn't ignore the signs on his own property. Something didn't feel right. He returned home, thinking about the next steps. Over the next few days, the trespassing continued. A small pile of trash appeared near the edge of his driveway, and his equipment shed door had scratches, as if someone had tried to force it open. He began to feel that the situation was escalating. He documented everything, taking photographs, making notes, and carefully recording each incident. He knew the value of evidence, if things worsened. More importantly, he wanted to remain calm and in control. Losing his temper wouldn't help. He had faced challenges in life where staying collected made the difference between success and disaster. Despite his efforts, the intrusions became bolder. One morning he found tire tracks in the soft soil near the back of his land. Someone had driven a vehicle across his property without permission. The plants near the tracks were crushed, and he felt a surge of frustration. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was disrespect, a challenge to his authority and the boundaries he had set on his own land. He spent hours thinking about the right approach. Confronting someone without a plan could be dangerous, yet ignoring it was not an option. He needed to protect what was his. He started talking to a few close friends who had served with him in the military. They understood discipline, strategy, and loyalty. Over coffee one evening, he explained the situation, careful not to exaggerate, but detailing the signs of trespass, the broken fences, and the damaged crops. His friends listened, their faces serious, knowing the weight of the problem. They asked questions, not to alarm him, but to help him see the best path forward. Their experience was invaluable. They suggested ways to document incidents, secure the property more effectively, and even monitor the land without putting himself at unnecessary risk. He realized he didn't have to face this alone. He also considered the legal angle. Contacting local authorities seemed obvious, but he knew from experience that law enforcement often had bigger priorities, and paperwork could slow things down. Still, he reported the incidents, making sure to have a record. The officers were polite, but their words lacked urgency. They promised to keep an eye out, but he sensed the reality. He could not rely entirely on them. If someone continued to push boundaries, he would have to take measures to defend his property in a controlled and strategic way. The nights grew tense. Every sound outside made him alert. Leaves rustling, branches snapping, the distant hum of a vehicle. His mind was always analyzing, planning. He installed lights and motion sensors, making sure to maintain a low profile, but ensuring he would notice any intrusion. Each morning, he checked the land thoroughly. It became almost a ritual, a combination of vigilance and reflection. He reminded himself that this was about protecting what he had built, not seeking revenge. The property represented years of effort, memories, and the stability of his life. Allowing anyone to damage it without response was not an option. His thoughts often wandered back to his platoon days. Discipline, teamwork, and strategy had guided him then, and now those same principles seemed relevant. He remembered how they had faced challenges together, how careful planning and calm execution had made the difference. The skills he had honed in service were not just for the battlefield, they applied to life as well. If he approached this situation with the same mindset, he could regain control and protect his sanctuary without unnecessary conflict or chaos. Days turned into weeks, and the incidents, while small, continued. A part of him was angry, but another part was wary. Acting hastily could escalate matters beyond control. He focused on being methodical, learning patterns, and predicting the intruder's next moves. Every broken fence post, every footprint, every disturbed plant told a story. It was like piecing together a puzzle. He documented, analyzed, and adjusted. Slowly, he started to feel a sense of preparation. He might not know exactly who was trespassing, but he was no longer caught off guard. He was ready to respond strategically if the need arose. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he stood on the porch, looking out over his land. The shadows stretched across the fields, and the world seemed calm once again. But he knew better. The peace was fragile, and the intruders had tested boundaries before. This time, he promised himself he would not be passive. He would defend his property intelligently, with precision and care. He had the knowledge, the experience, and the support of those he trusted. He had spent his life building resilience, and now it would serve him well. As he turned to go inside, a cool breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the quiet assurance that he was not alone in this. The memories of shared struggles with his platoon brought a sense of confidence. Challenges were not new to him, and this was just another test. He knew it would require patience, planning, and courage, but he was prepared. His land, his sanctuary, would not be violated without consequence. In the calm of that evening, he felt a quiet determination settle in his chest, a determination that would guide his next steps and prepare him for the confrontation that was coming. He went to bed that night with a clear mind, planning the days ahead. Each morning would be a check, each evening a reflection. He would strengthen his defenses, gather more information, and stay vigilant. The line had been crossed, but he would reclaim control with careful strategy and measured action. He understood that this was not just about fences or plants. It was about respect, ownership, and standing up for what was right. And he was ready to do whatever it took, thoughtfully and decisively. To protect everything he had built and cherished, the next few days brought a new level of frustration and unease. The intruders had not stopped. Each morning, he would wake early, as always, and walk through the property, inspecting fences, gates, and the areas where he had seen footprints. More tire tracks appeared near the back field, and small items he had stored outside had been moved or damaged. It was clear that the intruders were testing his patience, probing to see how much they could get away with. The anger he felt was tempered by his training and experience. Acting rashly would only make things worse. He needed a plan. He began noticing patterns. The intrusions often happened late at night, sometimes when the wind was strong and the night was dark. On a few occasions, he saw distant headlights through the trees or heard the crunch of gravel under tires. It was not constant, but it was enough to make him alert and cautious. He started keeping a notebook by the door, jotting down the times and locations of each incident. Each mark, each footprint, each sign of movement told him more about who might be coming and what they intended. It was like putting together a puzzle, and he was determined not to leave any piece unexamined. The local authorities had been polite, but slow. He reported each incident carefully, providing photos and notes. The officers listened and promised to patrol the area, but he could sense their lack of urgency. Their focus was elsewhere, and while they meant well, he could not depend on them to protect his property fully. This reality forced him to think more strategically. He realized that he would have to take matters into his own hands. But he needed to do it carefully and without creating danger for himself or others. Late one night, he set up a series of small cameras around the property, hidden among the trees and along the fences. He wanted to catch the intruders in the act, to have concrete proof, and to understand their movements better. The cameras were discreet, capturing motion and sound without alerting anyone. As the night passed, he checked the footage repeatedly, analyzing every shadow and sound. It was tedious work, but it gave him a sense of control. Knowledge, he thought, was power. If he knew exactly how they operated, he could respond in a way that would protect his land and avoid unnecessary conflict. The intrusions were not just annoying, they were escalating. One morning, he found his tool shed had been tampered with. The lock was scratched, the door frame weakened. Nothing was missing, but the message was clear. They wanted to provoke him to test whether he would react. He cleaned up the damage and reinforced the door, installing a stronger lock. Each small act of destruction fueled his determination. He would not be intimidated. This land was his responsibility, and he was prepared to defend it with all the skill and strategy he had learned over a lifetime. He also began speaking more seriously with his old platoon comrades. They understood discipline, strategy, and teamwork better than anyone. He explained the situation in detail, careful to be honest and precise. They listened, their expressions serious, absorbing the facts without judgment. They offered advice, sharing ideas about surveillance, defense, and response tactics. Their presence, even if only advisory for now, gave him a renewed sense of strength. He realized he was not alone. His connections, built over years of shared hardship and loyalty, could help him navigate this growing challenge. He considered every angle. How could he secure his property without resorting to violence? How could he deter intruders without breaking laws or creating unnecessary risk? His mind, trained to anticipate threats, worked constantly, analyzing each possible outcome. He decided to mark the boundaries more clearly to ensure there was no question about where his land ended. Signs were placed, fences repaired, and sensitive areas reinforced. He wanted to make it obvious that trespassing would not be tolerated, but he also wanted to remain within the law. The line between caution and action was thin, and he tread carefully. The intruders did not slow down. One night he found fresh tracks leading into the woods near the property line. They had moved silently, but their presence was unmistakable. He followed the tracks carefully, documenting everything and taking photographs. This was more than trespassing. Noet was testing his resolve. He began to feel a sense of strategy building within him. He would confront this threat not with blind anger, but with preparation and discipline. He remembered his training, the countless times he and his platoon had faced challenges and overcome them through calm, thoughtful action. He also began improving his own knowledge of local laws and property rights. He read books, consulted online resources, and even reached out to a local attorney for advice. He wanted to ensure that every move he made was legally sound. The intruders had crossed the line, but he would not give them an advantage by acting impulsively. By understanding the boundaries of the law, he could defend his property effectively and without fear of consequences. This careful approach gave him confidence. He was no longer reacting blindly, he was preparing at night. He often sat on his porch watching the stars and listening to the quiet sounds of the countryside. The tension was always there, underlying the peaceful scenery. But he found solace in small routines: a cup of tea, the feel of a warm blanket, the distant hoot of an owl. These moments reminded him that life was not just about conflict. It was about resilience, about finding balance even when challenges arose. He reminded himself that he was not just protecting property, he was protecting years of hard work, memories, and the sense of security he had built. One afternoon, he noticed new tire tracks leading directly to the back field. They were deep, fresh, and reckless. Someone had driven across the land intentionally, ignoring all previous boundaries. This was escalation, and he could no longer pretend it was minor. He photographed everything, noting the direction, depth, and possible vehicle type. Each detail mattered. He began to map out the likely routes the intruders were using, imagining possible strategies to intercept them safely and effectively. His mind, honed by years of service, shifted naturally into planning mode. He shared his observations with a few trusted neighbors, not to alarm them, but to gain additional eyes on the property. Some neighbors were supportive, offering to keep watch and report anything suspicious. Others seemed hesitant, wary of getting involved. Still, he appreciated the community's support, knowing that even small contributions could make a difference. The combined effort gave him a broader perspective on what was happening, reinforcing his sense that he was not isolated. Each day, the intruders pushed boundaries a little further. They moved objects, left signs of presence, and occasionally made noises intended to intimidate. But he remained calm, documenting, observing, and preparing. He realized that the intruders were testing both his patience and his reaction. If he acted impulsively, it would escalate. If he ignored it, they would continue to take advantage. The solution lay in controlled, strategic response. By the end of the week, he felt a growing sense of readiness. His cameras were in place, the fences were reinforced, and he had clear documentation of every incident. He had spoken with legal advisors, enlisted the guidance of his platoon comrades, and involved supportive neighbors. Each step had been deliberate, measured, and careful. The intruders, unaware of the full extent of his preparation, continued their provocations, but the balance of power was shifting. He was no longer just a passive target. He was a defender, fully aware and ready to respond when the moment came. He spent evenings reflecting on his life and experiences. Every challenge he had faced, every obstacle overcome, had prepared him for this moment. He drew strength from those memories, from the discipline instilled in him over years of service. The intruders were testing him, but he was testing himself in return. Patience, observation, and readiness were his allies. He reminded himself that the goal was not revenge, it was protection. His property, his sanctuary, and his peace of mind were worth defending thoughtfully and decisively. As the nights grew colder and the days shorter, he felt a quiet determination settle within him. The intruders had crossed the line, but he had not yet. He was patient, strategic, and disciplined, ready to take the necessary steps when the time was right. He knew that every action would count, and that preparation was the key to success. In the calm moments between the challenges, he found clarity and focus, understanding that this was a battle not of force, but of intellect, patience, and unwavering resolve. The stage was set for the next phase of the confrontation, and he was ready to face it fully aware and prepared. He knew he could not face the intrusions alone forever. The repeated trespassing had grown bolder, and the property he had nurtured for years was at risk. Thinking back to his time in service, he remembered the value of teamwork and coordination. He decided it was time to reach out to his old platoon members, not because he wanted conflict, but because he wanted support, guidance, and a disciplined approach to protecting what was his. He called the first friend he trusted the most. Explaining the situation clearly without exaggeration, focusing on facts and observations, the friend listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions. He described the tire tracks, the disturbed areas of the garden, and the repeated signs of trespass. He explained how the local authorities had been slow to respond, and how the intruders had begun to test his patience on multiple fronts. His friend nodded knowingly, suggesting practical measures: observation, documentation, and preparation without confrontation. It was reassuring to speak with someone who understood discipline and strategy. Over the next week, he contacted a few more platoon members. Each conversation reinforced his confidence. They discussed surveillance tactics, boundary reinforcement, and ways to detect intrusions without putting anyone at risk. They emphasized calm, calculated action, and he felt a renewed sense of clarity. The experience was familiar, analyzing patterns, assessing risks, and preparing for the right moment. He realized that involving his platoon did not mean inviting conflict. It meant creating a structured response to a growing problem. A plan began to take shape. The first step was enhanced surveillance. Using the cameras he had already set up, he worked with his platoon comrades to monitor activity more closely. They suggested repositioning a few cameras to cover blind spots and installing additional motion sensors. Each suggestion was practical, grounded in experience. He followed their advice carefully, ensuring that the equipment was discreet and functional. By nightfall, his property was more closely watched than ever before. He felt a sense of control returning, knowing that he could anticipate movements rather than simply reacting to them. Next, they focused on communication. They established a discrete system to stay in touch, updating each other on any suspicious activity. It was important that information was shared quickly and accurately, without alarming others unnecessarily. The platoon members brought knowledge of coordinated strategies, honed from years of shared service, which he applied carefully. Every message, every update reinforced his sense that he was not facing this alone. Together, he could act intelligently and decisively if the intrusions escalated further. He also strengthened the property itself. Fences were repaired and reinforced, gates checked and secured, and vulnerable areas identified and protected. The platoon members suggested using natural barriers like thorny bushes to discourage intrusion, along with better lighting in key areas. Each step was deliberate, ensuring that safety and legality were maintained. The property began to feel more secure, not just physically but psychologically. He could walk the land with confidence, knowing he had a thoughtful strategy in place. One afternoon, a platoon member visited in person. They walked the property together, assessing the damage, checking for weak points, and discussing potential scenarios. The visit was practical and reassuring. He felt a sense of camaraderie he hadn't experienced in years. They spoke about tactics, observation, and response measures without needing to rush into action. Their presence was a reminder that preparation and planning were just as powerful as confrontation. They left him with concrete steps, maps, notes for monitoring and protecting the land. Meanwhile, the intruders continued their provocations. Tire tracks reappeared in fresh soil, small objects were moved, and footprints suggested nighttime exploration. He analyzed each sign carefully, comparing it with the previous patterns. The intruders were bold but predictable. Their movements followed a discernible rhythm, and he began anticipating when and where they might appear next. The confidence he felt came not from recklessness, but from preparation, observation, and strategic thought. He was learning the art of controlled defense, where patience and intelligence mattered more than force. He also began keeping a detailed log of incidents, noting dates, times, and locations. Photos and videos from the cameras were cataloged carefully. This documentation served two purposes. It provided evidence for potential legal action and allowed him to study patterns more effectively. Every detail mattered. Small observations like the angle of a tire track or the spacing of footprints could reveal much about the intruder's methods and intentions. The work was tedious but empowering, giving him clarity and confidence. As the days passed, he began to feel a subtle shift. The intruders seemed unaware of the depth of his preparation. They continued their incursions, but they were no longer in complete control. The balance of power was moving. With the platoon's guidance, he was learning to anticipate, monitor, and plan responses in a way that kept him safe and protected his property. Each decision was deliberate, each action calculated. And he felt a growing sense of mastery over the situation. He also took time to reflect on the importance of patience. His training had taught him that impulsive reactions often led to mistakes. By observing, documenting, and preparing, he was turning a chaotic situation into one where he held the advantage. The intruders might have been bold and reckless, but he was disciplined and strategic. He reminded himself that this was a battle of control, not force. By staying calm and thoughtful, he could protect what he valued most without unnecessary risk. One night, the intruders ventured closer than ever before. Their presence was evident from the deep tracks and the sound of movement near the back field. He watched through a camera feed, analyzing every detail. He noted their numbers, the speed of their movements, and the areas they focused on. His heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with focus. He and the platoon had prepared for this moment. They were ready to respond if necessary, but the goal remained to protect the property while avoiding direct confrontation, unless unavoidable. In the quiet moments, he also reflected on trust. Trust in his platoon, in his own experience, and in the principles he had followed throughout life. The support of people who understood strategy and discipline gave him confidence. He was no longer isolated, no longer reacting in solitude. Together they formed a network of vigilance, each step carefully considered and each observation shared. He felt a renewed sense of purpose and clarity, understanding that preparation and loyalty could counter even persistent challenges. During the following days, he refined his strategies further. Cameras were checked and adjusted, motion sensors tested, and observation points marked for maximum visibility. He practiced walking the property at night, moving quietly, observing patterns, and noting any changes. Each step reinforced his preparedness. He knew that the intruders would not stop entirely, but he could control how he responded. The advantage was now shifting in his favor. His property, his sanctuary, was becoming increasingly secure, and his confidence grew with each careful step. The intruders' actions became more predictable, and he began to develop contingency plans. If they returned in force, he knew how to respond safely. If they tried subtle provocations, he had measures to document and deter them. Each scenario was mapped out in his mind and on paper, ensuring that he could act strategically without panic. The planning was meticulous, reflecting years of experience and the discipline instilled by his time in service. He felt a growing sense of control, turning anxiety into purpose. Throughout this period, he also took time to connect with the land itself. Walking the fields, tending the garden, and maintaining the fences provided a sense of calm and grounding. The land was more than a battleground, it was a source of resilience and clarity. By caring for it, he reinforced the emotional and practical stakes of his defense. The intruders could test boundaries, but they could not diminish the work and memories embedded in the property. His connection to the land fueled his determination, reminding him why each action, each plan, was so important. By the end of Part 3, he felt a quiet readiness. The intruders were still out there, but he was no longer a passive observer. With the guidance of his platoon, careful preparation, and strategic thinking, he had turned the situation into one where he held the advantage. Each night brought vigilance, each day brought planning, and his sense of control grew steadily. The stage was set for a confrontation that would be managed intelligently and decisively. He understood that patience, discipline, and loyalty were his greatest assets, and he was ready to use them to protect everything he had built. The night was darker than usual. With a heavy silence hanging over the property, the wind was still, the trees stood motionless, and even the usual rustle of leaves seemed absent. It was a night that demanded vigilance, and he felt it deep in his bones. Weeks of preparation had led to this moment. The intruders had grown careless, pushing boundaries further than ever, and he knew they would return. He moved quietly across the property, observing the faint shadows, listening to every subtle sound, and monitoring the camera feeds. The platoon members were positioned strategically, each with a clear role. They had studied the property layout, the likely approach paths, and the areas most vulnerable to intrusion. This was not about aggression. It was about control and protection. Every step they took, every decision made, was deliberate. Communication was low and precise, with hand signals and whispers being the language of the night. They were there to ensure that if confrontation became necessary, it would be handled efficiently and safely. He checked each camera feed carefully, noticing a subtle flicker on one near the backfield. Someone was moving there. The intruders were approaching the property, and their movements confirmed what he had suspected from previous patterns. They were bold, but not cautious. They had no idea how prepared he was. He felt a surge of focus, the clarity of purpose that comes from preparation, meeting opportunity. He signaled to his platoon members, confirming positions and readiness. Everyone knew their part. The intruders entered the backfield, trampling over the soil and damaging a few small plants. Their confidence was misplaced. their actions reckless. He observed them carefully, noting their numbers, movements, and potential intentions. They seemed to believe they could act without consequence. He knew better. His team was ready, disciplined, and aware. There would be no chaos tonight, only controlled. Precise action to protect what was his. As they moved further into the property, he activated additional motion sensors, quietly illuminating pathways, without alerting the intruders directly. The sudden awareness of movement startled them slightly, causing hesitation. He knew they were beginning to sense that something was different, that the situation was no longer in their control. He stayed calm, reminding himself to act only when necessary, relying on strategy rather than impulse. One intruder tried to approach the equipment shed, testing the locks and peering through small openings. He and a platoon member were already positioned nearby, hidden from view but able to observe every move. They did not confront directly, but moved in a way that subtly blocked escape paths, ensuring the intruder could not advance without being detected. The tension was high, but it was controlled. Every step was measured, every decision deliberate. He felt the adrenaline but kept his focus steady. The goal was not to escalate violence, but to stop the intrusion and protect the property. His mind, trained through years of service, operated clearly and efficiently. He monitored movements, communicated silently with his platoon, and anticipated potential maneuvers. The intruders were increasingly aware of resistance but could not pinpoint its source. They were disoriented, unsure, beginning to make mistakes. The platoon members coordinated to surround key areas without being visible. They used the natural cover of trees, bushes, and shadows to their advantage, positioning themselves in a way that allowed observation and control without confrontation. The intruders moved cautiously now, sensing the presence of unseen eyes. He felt a sense of satisfaction, not in dominating others, but in seeing the planning and preparation come to life. The balance of power had shifted, and the intruders were no longer the ones in control. He decided it was time to take subtle action. Using quiet signals, he guided the platoon to make slight adjustments in positioning, creating the perception of more presence than there actually was. Every step was psychological, aiming to deter the intruders without physical confrontation if possible. The intruders paused, exchanged uncertain gestures, and began to retrace their steps, but he knew the night was not over. He remained vigilant, watching every movement, ready to act if needed. One intruder tried to leave a mark, spray painting a fence post. He moved quickly, intercepting the action with calm authority. The intruder froze, caught in the subtle control of the situation. He approached carefully, maintaining a safe distance, and made it clear through tone and gesture that the property was being protected and observed. The message was received without a word being shouted. The intruder backed away slowly, uncertainty in every movement. The other intruders began to notice the change. Confusion set in. They realized that their previous patterns were no longer effective. Every step they took was being observed, every action countered by unseen control. The platoon's careful coordination had created an environment where the intruders were disoriented and cautious. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that training, planning, and discipline were winning the night without unnecessary chaos. As the night progressed, the intruders made several attempts to test boundaries, but each time they were met with subtle intervention. Lights, movement, and positioning created the impression of a larger presence. The psychological effect was clear. The intruders were unsure of what they were facing and increasingly hesitant. He continued to monitor, adjusting tactics in real time, ensuring the property remained secure while minimizing risk. Every move was calculated, every outcome anticipated. At one point, one intruder attempted to take a small tool from the shed. He and a platoon member moved quietly to intercept, not with aggression, but with controlled presence. The intruder froze, recognizing that he was being watched and that any further action would be met with immediate response. He maintained calm authority, signaling the intruder to retreat. The intruder hesitated, then stepped back, leaving the tool untouched. This moment reinforced the effectiveness of preparation, discipline, and strategy. Throughout the night, he remained aware of the environment, Sounds, shadows, and subtle movements were all clues to intruder activity. He checked cameras frequently, cross-referenced with on-site observation, and adjusted platoon positioning as needed. The intruders continued to probe, but they were slow, cautious, and increasingly frustrated. He felt a growing sense of confidence. Weeks of preparation, planning, strategic thinking were paying off. The intruders eventually regrouped near the edge of the property, confused and wary. They had expected minimal resistance, not the coordinated, disciplined response they now faced. He and the platoon maintained positions, signaling subtly to reinforce the perception of strength and control. The intruders began to retreat, their movements hesitant and uncoordinated. The property was secure, and the intruders had received a clear message. Boundaries were respected, and violations would not go unchecked. After the intruders left, he and the platoon conducted a thorough sweep of the property. Cameras were checked, fences inspected, and any minor disturbances noted. Everything was recorded and documented carefully, ensuring that any future incidents could be analyzed and addressed. The sense of control and preparedness remained strong. The night had been long and tense, but the outcome was exactly as intended. The property was secure, and the intruders had been stopped without chaos or unnecessary conflict. He spent the rest of the night walking the land, reflecting on the events and planning for the future. He understood that this confrontation would not be the last, but he was now confident in his ability to respond strategically and effectively. Every measure taken had been deliberate, every action calculated. The intruders had underestimated him, and that mistake had ensured their retreat. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not in dominance, but in the successful execution of preparation and discipline. In the early hours of morning, he gathered with the platoon members to review the night. Each observation, each movement, each reaction was discussed and analyzed. They spoke about what went well, what could be improved, and how to refine strategies for any future incursions. The atmosphere was one of calm achievement. There was no celebration, no arrogance. Just the shared understanding that preparation, teamwork, and discipline had protected the property and its boundaries. The sunrise brought a new sense of peace over the property. The fields, the garden, and the fences were intact, and the intruders had retreated. The work was not over, but a crucial step had been taken. He felt a profound respect for the value of planning, observation, and calm action. He knew that future nights might bring challenges, but he also knew that he and his platoon were prepared. The intruders had tested boundaries and lost. The property, the sanctuary, the peace he had built remained intact. By the time the sun fully rose, he was already walking the property again, checking each fence post, each camera, and each corner. The morning light revealed small details missed during the night: broken branches, displaced soil, and subtle tire impressions. He documented everything, ensuring that no information was lost. The intruders' retreat had provided a moment of calm, but he remained vigilant. Preparation was ongoing. Lessons from the night would inform every future action. Throughout the day, he reflected on the lessons learned. The intruders had underestimated preparation, discipline, and strategic thinking. By remaining calm, observing patterns, and coordinating with trusted comrades, he had protected the property without escalating violence. The experience reinforced his belief in thoughtful action and the power of preparation. He knew that boundaries must be defended intelligently. That respect for property and law could guide even tense confrontations, and that patience and observation were as crucial as any physical barrier. He spent the afternoon repairing minor damage, reinforcing weak points, and reviewing camera footage. The platoon members remained involved, offering advice and support. Their combined experience ensured that every step taken was effective and safe. The property was not. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting warm light across the property. After the tense events of the previous night, the land felt calm, almost serene. The fields glowed softly, the garden appeared undisturbed, and even the fences seemed sturdier than ever. He stood at the edge of his property, looking over every detail. The intruders had retreated, and the immediate danger had passed, but he knew vigilance would always be necessary. This land, built with hard work and care, required both protection and respect. Over the next few days, he focused on assessing the full extent of the intruder's impact. Small areas of trampled soil, broken branches, and displaced items were carefully inspected and repaired. He made detailed notes of each incident, documenting everything for future reference. These records were not just for legal purposes. They were a tool to understand the patterns of intrusion, to predict potential challenges, to refine his strategies for maintaining control. His methodical approach reflected years of experience and discipline, transforming chaos into knowledge. He reached out to the local authorities again, providing the detailed logs and camera footage from the past few weeks. The officers reviewed the evidence carefully, nodding at the thoroughness of the documentation. This time, their tone was more serious. They recognized the repeated attempts at trespassing and promised to patrol the area more frequently. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his careful preparation and documentation had not only protected his property, but also strengthened the response of the local authorities. His actions had created tangible results without unnecessary confrontation. The platoon members remained in contact, offering advice and guidance for continued vigilance. They suggested routine checks of the perimeter, regular maintenance of security equipment, and strategies for deterring future intrusions. Their experience, combined with his growing confidence, created a strong network of support. Each conversation reinforced the lessons learned over the past week's preparation. Observation and strategic action were far more effective than impulsive reactions. He felt grateful for their guidance, knowing that the bonds formed through shared experience were now an invaluable resource. He also took time to reflect personally. The past few weeks had been challenging, testing patience, discipline, and resilience. He realized that this experience had not only been about defending property, but also about self-discipline and focus. Each step taken, each observation made, had strengthened his sense of responsibility and control. The land was more than a physical space. It was a reflection of his values, his hard work, and his ability to respond thoughtfully to challenges. Protecting it had become a test of both strategy and character. Community support played a vital role as well. Neighbors who had observed the situation offered encouragement and assistance. Watching discreetly and reporting suspicious activity, their involvement created a subtle network of awareness that added another layer of security. The experience reinforced the importance of community, trust, and cooperation. He realized that boundaries were not just about fences and signs. They were about shared respect and mutual accountability. The support of the community added both practical and emotional strength to his defense efforts.